Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melissa Bauer, and I'm the Member Sustainability Manager with the Pet Sustainability Coalition. Thanks so much for joining us for our webinar this afternoon, or morning, or evening, wherever you happen to be joining us from. We've got a big crowd expected for today, so I'm gonna just pause for just a moment and allow people to join. But thanks so much for joining us, and we'll be right back. Thanks. All right. So once again, welcome everybody. And once again, my name is Melissa, and I'm the Member Sustainability Services Manager with the Pet Sustainability Coalition. We are so excited to have you all join us today. We're going to be listening to the amazing Jen Briggs, who will be talking to us about hiring for servant leadership, which is a topic I know that a bunch of us are very excited. So we'll be previewing the rest of our webinar series for the summer at the end. We're also going to make sure that we leave some time at the end for some questions. But before we get into that, Jen, I want to introduce you to her. She's amazing. And are you there?
I am
Hello.
here. Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you. I will hand it over to you, but thanks so much for joining us, Jen. We're excited to hear from you today.
Absolutely. Thank you. So what we're going to be talking about today is hiring for servant leadership. And I think this is just such an important thing to consider because I really do believe the seeds of great organizations start with hiring, and the hiring process is critical. And you know, for the work that so many of you do, I think it's important because it's in a lot of ways more about a cause and a purpose and you know, helping all of us. I'm a pet owner. My dog is on Instagram, of course, The Adventures of Milo Briggs. And, you know, it's just so important for us to see these companies thrive and to continue to do the good work that you do. So I'll be taking you through some processes related to servant leadership. But first, I want to talk a little bit about what servant leadership is, and that'll help us go into the hiring piece. So I first learned about servant leadership with my role at, first a little bit about me. I am involved in a few things. So GRITT Business Coaching is something we advocate for open book management. At the Beyster Institute, we advocate for employee ownership. And then I serve as an independent outside director for a few companies. And in a large part, it's to help them run and manage a better business. And of course, I am an alumni of New Belgium Brewing and very proud of everything my coworkers do there. So let's go into servant leadership. I really discovered this in my work at New Belgium Brewing, and I follow a lot of the work of Robert Greenleaf. And here's some quotes of his. And I wanted to share this with you because I think it kind of sets the stage. Now, I've adapted a lot of these thoughts around servant leadership, and it's not new. But really, it's not a program, it's a mindset. So when we look at this from Mr. Greenleaf, a servant leader focuses primarily on the growth and well-being of people and the communities to which they belong. Traditional leadership generally involves the accumulation and exercise of power by one at the top of the pyramid. Servant leadership is very different. A servant leadership shares power and puts the needs of others first and helps people prepare and perform as highly as possible. And then also inside the organization, organizations themselves can be ones of servant leadership, and they help raise the capacity to serve in major institutions, and they're a very regenerative force that helps build communities up. And so businesses can do that. I discovered this when I was very early on my career. I was actually practicing community health education, and I ran into a few businesses that were just amazing to me because they were not just focused on what they did in terms of their product or services. They were focused on what their products and services did within the greater community and how could they help their employees and all the people in the community raise to a better and more healthy state. So the way I've adapted this idea and the way I kind of digest it is leadership is serving the best interest of the business and the stakeholders, of course, through serving the employees. And it's just a very almost flipped mindset from what we talk about in terms of regular leadership, where there's typically a centralized power, centralized forces inside the business. This is distributing power and helping everybody be more creative and contributing in the company. One of the reasons I think this happens is when we look at the financials of a company, labor is on the expense or it's seen as a liability. And so we've just become very accustomed as business to looking at our financial statements, and that's very good and very healthy, and we need to do that, but constantly seeing it as an expense. I heard this interview by a reporter from the BBC the other day, and he was talking about the Lyft transaction that just recently happened and how the labor burden of the drivers might cause them to reduce their labor expense. And I think this just frames up the mindset that we've just really come to see labor as a liability. It's where it sits. But this is flipping it around and turning it upside down and seeing labor as an asset, transcending what we see in the financial statements and moving towards how can we take this great asset that we have inside the organization and turn it into something wonderful. How can we use this asset to create better work, create better interactions with customers, and actually create more growth and profitability? So what servant leadership is, at a very high level, it's really about working with attention and intention all the time. So it is very active. It's flexible because servant leaders can adapt their style and meet people where they need to be met to help them grow. It's long-term focused, so it's not just very tactical, task-driven. It's about looking at the horizon and seeing how do we need to build this business and how can I build this to a better business by focusing on the talent and helping that talent grow the wisdom inside the company. It is very growth-driven. So, you know, for human growth, we need to have new opportunities and be able to stretch ourselves and kind of move outside of our comfort zones to take on new skills, new opportunities, new adventures. So unless the business is growing, the humans can always grow within it too. So there's all kinds of things to be doing it in terms of how do we help grow a company and grow opportunities. It is a mindset, so it's a way of thinking. It's just a way that people perceive how leadership should be done in a company. It's actually highly disciplined. So servant leaders are very active with their people, but they are not micromanagers. And because of this activity, these servant leaders can conjure excellence every day. They'll help people know how to move from average to better through daily interactions. And these servant leaders tend to feed the mind. So they'll work a lot on emotional intelligence, something that we've come to know as grit, helping people be able to overcome obstacles, helping people overcome trying times and really build this fortitude and perseverance. Now, what it is not, it's not passive. It's not a laissez-faire, like everybody just kind of gets to do what they want to do. It's not only focused on the long term because it is very much about using what's going on in the day to help move the business forward to the long term. And servant leaders don't accept poor performance. Servant leaders will help people, but they're also not willing to let a single individual kind of negatively infect a healthy group. It's not associated to a specific personality style. It's definitely not a program. And servant leaders aren't just task managers. Ultimately, what they want to do is help people be self-leaders, and so people can grow their autonomy and independence in terms of managing their own tasks and calendars and priorities. So what I prefer and what I've used a lot is behavioral interviewing. And behavioral interviewing, if you've never done it before, it's really a simple concept, but it's describing a past behavior in a certain situation. So you'll ask people about, tell me about a time where this happened, or tell me about a time where that happened. It's a very dialogue-based question, and the important thing for when you're behavioral interviewing is the other person, the interviewee, should really be talking more than the interviewer. So you're really getting to know and understand how this person thinks. So I'm going to go through some sample questions that I've used in the past to look for servant leaders. The first one is, what role does failure play in the workplace? And to give some examples. Failure and overcoming failure is a big deal. In business, things aren't always going to be perfect. We're going to have issues and things that happen, and we really need to have elastic minds and people who can rebound from failure. And of course, there's some failure that is a critical failure that needs to be addressed. In my past, I worked for New Belgium Brewing, just to give you an example, and fat tire is made with very high quality processes, and it's repeated over and over again. So, not doing that repeated, very quality intensive process would be a critical failure. But on the other hand, brewing a new beer for a new taste, for drinkers, giving them something new, and then maybe that fails. That kind of failure is okay because it's thinking, it's assessing the marketplace, it's trying something new, and those things are okay. So you want to understand how people perceive failure. Here's another one of describing a situation that had optimal participation. One of the things that's come to kind of bother me a little bit more is when people describe their leadership style as collaborative. I think that's more of just kind of business lingo bingo now of, yeah, of course everybody's supposed to be collaborative, but smart collaboration is a skill. How do we bring out the really important thinking of the people to help move the business forward? Sometimes there's over collaboration. Collaboration doesn't mean having a series of meetings. And I think a lot of people, and you read articles about this, and I've experienced it, we kind of are in so many meetings that we don't feel like we're really adding value to the business. So situational leaders are really attentive to this. How do we make participation grow the value of the business? Here's another question about identifying healthy team attributes and harnessing all of the people for the good of a project. Servant leaders don't just focus on individuals, they focus on the community. And this is the common unity of people that work together. And so we all have different traits and gifts and things that we can do well. We all have weaknesses that we need to overcome or work on. So what is the servant leader doing as a group of people to help bring this wonderful talent together to really solve problems? So focusing on team is a really big deal for a servant leadership. And then another one is, take me through the life cycle of an employee and what was their role. So a lot of times we'll get new people that work with us in the business, and they might not know our business. They might not even know their jobs yet. And when you're hiring for mindset, you're going to hire for these people that are curious and critical thinkers first, and then teach them skills on the job. So a servant leader understands how to shift their role and how to build somebody who's a brand new employee, know how to build skills, but they also know when to let go. And when is that time, and how do you understand as a person progresses from learner to being very independent and autonomous, how does the servant leader shift their style? How do they still attend to the emotional needs of an employee while building specific skill sets? So this question is a real good one because you'll be able to learn, what does a person do to adapt to meet what the person needs at the time they need it and really grow the wisdom in the company. Some more, how do you define poor performance? Poor performance can be tricky. Sometimes there's very clear things that identify poor performance. I am a huge advocate, as I'm sure most of you guys are. If there's harassment or discrimination at any point going on anywhere in the company, those folks need to they need to be gone. And there's also times that poor performance can be because somebody has a life situation going on that's distracting them from being able to do high quality work. And how long can that be affected? And how do you work with them to help still bring out the best performance at work? So having that person understand how would they deal with these variations of performance. Even though we do performance reviews and we rate people from 1 to 5 in a lot of cases, it's not as simple as that. Leading people and human psychology is complex. And so this will get to some of those issues. Developing critical thinkers. Really, that's what you want in all of this, is to grow people and help them think about the business, to think about what can I do today that will help the customers of tomorrow, that will help grow the value of the business, and to be constantly thinking of how they can improve within whatever realm they are. And then, especially if you use inclusive strategic planning, how can everybody contribute together to build new ideas and work together and solve problems? One of my favorite answers to this is managers who use the Socratic method. We're used to the Socratic method, in school, where you had those teachers that would say, what do you think about this? And that is a very easy thing to do for the servant leadership, is ask people what they think. Leaders in well, even now, but leaders of the future are going to be more about coordinating all the gifts and talents of the many people versus just being a person inside the organization that has all the answers. How have you used the wisdom of a group to solve a business problem or discover a new opportunity? Similar to the one before that is, how do you use the wisdom of a team to come together and solve that? To give you an example from my new Belgium world, I remember we had a special account that was going to, that had asked us to do a special type of can. And the packaging department, the people who packaged the beer, were very upset about this particular project, because it was going to inhibit their efficiency. This group of people was incredible at high efficient processes and really doing a good job on high quality packaging. And in beer, this is really important because any kind of oxygen that gets into it can alter the taste of the beer. However, on the other side of it, our salespeople were really excited about this new business opportunity, because this new configuration was going to be a portal to launch other future initiatives. And so we have these two groups of people, all amazing, who are at polar ends of this decision. And so we were able to bring these two groups of people together, and they ended up creating a better understanding of what the business opportunity was. They ended up working together to propose new opportunities in the way that everybody could understand and really maximize that opportunity. And so the servant leaders are really good at bringing people together to solve problems together versus just simply telling people what to do and then just hoping they understand. How do you measure your own success and why? I love this question too, because it gets at the root of, why does this person want to lead? Not everybody wants to lead. And when you are leading, what's going to make them most fulfilled? And for me personally, the answer to this question has been to see people that I work with grow. Over the course of my career, I've just seen so many people build themselves up, and they've gone on to incredible opportunities. They're contributing in amazing ways. And so I like to measure my own success through the success of people, and hope that maybe I played some small part in that. But really, it's a great opportunity when you get to see people have amazing futures together. So these are kinds of questions that you can ask. Leaning in and leaning out. And then there's personality assessments. So I am a huge advocate for using personality assessments, but not for choosing. I like using them to have better interviews. So when you know somebody has a particular area that they're strong in, you can ask questions around them. How do they maximize the strengths? One of the things I'll tell you all with my own personality is I tend to I'm a driver person, so I like to win. And so one of the things that I need to always overcome is it's not about me driving to win. I like to use that characteristic to help the team win. I like to help the business win because I like having success and seeing wonderful companies do amazing work. And that personality type can also have a negative impact where they can be so driven that they inadvertently, or maybe advertently in some cases, hurt other people along the way, or they will push people back so that they can make sure they win. So this is a winning in it together, just to give you an example. So the way to use personality assessments to help with servant leaders is to help them or to get an assessment on their own emotional intelligence, knowing their strengths and their limitations. Where can they add value? Again, where do they need to lean out and rely on the other members of the team? It's also a place where you can start talking about these ideas of ego and humility. I'm a big fan of Marcus Buckingham. I don't know if any of you have read some of his work, but he really focuses a lot on strength. And I happened to be at a conference where he said, oh, all leaders have egos at some point because leaders feel like they deserve to be in that spot. But it's, what is the ego in service of? Is the ego in service of me, or is it the ego in service of others? And so that's a really important thing of people can be confident, people should be confident and feel like they can lead people to something, but it's really about the people, not about them. Self-worth is another really important factor as we look into these personality assessments. People with high self-worth will grow the self-worth of others. And people with high self-worth are better performers, they're stronger. You'll have a more emotionally healthy environment when you have a lot of people who have high self-worth. And high self-worth and ego can be two different things. Ego in service of a selfish perspective, usually those people aren't filled with self-worth. So they use their ego to kind of grow their own self-worth. High self-worth people are really good at letting go and feeling a form of success as other people grow as well too. So these are really important concepts. So here's some questions to look out after you've done a personality assessment. How have they blended their characteristics with the team? So looking at what are their strengths and what are their limitations, and how can they put together a team that will really work to complement that, and then how do you turn those complementary factors into a high performing team? And then another question is, how did you determine each person's unique talent and help them contribute and grow more powerfully to the team and organization? So this question kind of flips it around in terms of how do they look to people's strengths and limitations, and how do they curate those? Do they use personality assessments with their own teams? How do they find and understand that? So now we're going to talk a little bit about interviewing channels. So we've covered personality assessments and just some, I think, good behavioral interviewing questions. Excuse me. But we'll look at these individual, group, and use of video and technology, and that rule, listen more than speaking. A lot of times when I read blogs or articles about interviewing, it'll list a lot about what questions do you ask, and that's really important, but having a keen listening around that to make sure that there's a really good dialogue around it's important. So individual interviewing is always good. You know, talking to somebody, understanding what's going to make them tick. I love group interviewing, but I've also seen recently a tendency in group interviews to kind of use a checklist style of interviewing. And some of this checklist style is done for good reason. In the United States, at least, you know, we're seeing these companies move to this to make sure the interviewing process is fair. And that is absolutely critical, is we need to make sure that any kind of bias, unconscious or conscious, is eliminated from the interview process. But I think we might be overcorrecting a little bit by going to this checklist style, because what we really want is that dialogue to understand how someone ticks. We want to understand their style and mindset. So if you're doing a group interview, make sure that you've set up the conditions for the interview environment to still be able to have really good dialogue. In some of the group interviews that we've done in the past, we've given people a project or given them like, how would you measure your own success in 30 days, 6 months, and 1 year, and have them talk about what milestones do they see that they would have to be successful. And some of those milestones should be oriented around the health of the team and the health of the organization. So these presentations can be really good. One of the cons about individual interviewing is, say you have an applicant or an interviewee going around, and maybe they'll interview with 5 different people, and those 5 different people are of course going to have different opinions on the interview, but getting these people to be able to report out in a very specific way is really important. So one of the things I've heard in the past is you'll have an applicant go around to the different individuals, and the individuals will report out and say, well, they're not a cultural fit. And this is one of those words that is like fingernails on a chalkboard for me, is we don't actually know what that means. And back to the bias elimination factor, is cultural fit is not a good enough reason to be able to explain why an individual is or isn't a good candidate for the job. People need to be able to get specific. So for this reason, I do like group interviewing over individual interviewing, because you have a set of people who are in the same experience, and then they can have dialogue about what concerned them, what they thought was really good, where they thought this person is going to need to grow, all those kinds of things. One caution always with interviewing is avoid the kind of unicorn standard. Um, we're not perfect. Humans aren't perfect. And so sometimes we set the standards so high in interviewing processes that it's going to be hard for any person to be successful. And this is why I like hiring for mindset first and then skill set second. Is if somebody's going to really be giving to the organization, who really is committed to growing it, um, those should be prioritized first. Of course, if you're hiring somebody with a very technical skill set and you need them to be up and running very fast, that is a very important factor. But don't hire for that over the contribution that somebody is going to give to the company in terms of growing the company's social engine. The use of video and technology. This is a really exciting, growing field that there's just a ton of opportunity on. So I'll tell you one that I've used. It's called HireVue, and there's other technologies like this. But what we would do with that, especially when you have a remote workforce that's all across the country, is people would video themselves answering some 3 key questions. So we lay out, pick 3 of the behavioral interviewing questions. They'd get the question, and then they'd record themselves answering it. And then this recording of these questions could be distributed to all the people on the interview team, and then they could decide what were the top 2 that they wanted to bring in. And so it's a fun way to do it. From an applicant perspective, I think it's a little it's challenging to record yourself and do that, but you can also get a sense for someone's sense of humor. You can get a sense for how that person's going to engage with people when they do get to meet them in person. So I think there are a lot of really fun ways to use video and technology in the process. And then with this recording capability, all the people who are in the stakeholder group for recommending hiring this person, they get to see the same set of information. So this can help when you're going through figuring out what is the input from all these people, making sure there isn't bias in the process, and making sure that they were focusing on the right things for the business. So there's a lot of opportunities there. And then this is one I think is really important. We've been talking a lot really exclusively about servant leadership, But servant leaders in a servant-led organization is very different than a top-down and command and control environment. And some people like to follow rules. They kind of like to be told what to do. And so I think when you're building an organization, and this is part of the seeds of the organizational mindset, everyone to some extent in the company needs to have some piece of servant leadership in their interview, because what you're really trying to do is build people who are going to be critical thinkers. And if somebody's simply just wanting to come in and do step 1, 2, and 3, and that's all they want to do and repeat, they might not be the best fit for a company that's really trying to grow this wisdom of we idea. You want people who are going to be oriented to doing tasks, because certainly we all have to do that, but also being able to be critical thinkers and look up at the horizon and think, what might be best? What might I be able to improve? How could I be able to make this better? How can I work better with my team? How can I add value to the company? People that are intrinsically doing that thought process throughout the company in every step of the way is going to be more powerful. And these people are also going to work better with the servant leaders, because servant leaders are going to push them to be critical thinkers. And so interviewing everyone as a leader in the company is important. Intellectual curiosity is a very big part of this interview process. So are they just going to be telling them, or are they going to be ready for questions? So we've talked about a lot of this, but what's the business case for it? It's hard to think, it's hard to imagine. It's 2020, this is the future of work, and it's 2019. When they look at, of course, this is from the World Economic Forum, when we look at the skills for the future of the workforce, I really do believe servant leaders are going to be the best ones to make this come out. The servant leader conjuring excellence is going to be important. The top skills for 2020, complex problem solving, that hasn't changed, but critical thinking, creativity, people management, coordinating with others, emotional intelligence, that's one that entered this 2020 list that wasn't in 2015. Judgment and decision making, that moved up from 8. Service orientation, negotiation, and cognitive flexibility. People that are able to flex their styles and change how they do to meet the needs of the situation, to meet the needs of the people around them, to help grow the company. This cognitive flexibility will help create a more change, not just resilient, but a change-oriented workplace, because things are moving faster. We have more information coming at us every day. Communication is much faster. So how do we consume all these things and then help them benefit our companies? So this will be a critical skill for all of us in the future, and having a servant leader mindset that is more open, who really wants to maximize the wonderful talent of a company, will have an advantage in building these top skills for the workforce. So I went through that pretty quick. I hope you guys have some questions, or if there's something you want me to dig into deeper, please enter a comment, and we'll talk about it some more.
Great, Jen. This is Melissa. That content was awesome. Thank you so much. This is such a topic out of my purview, but I know, but I just find it so fascinating. So thank you. If anyone on the call has any questions, we'd love to get those answered for you. We've got a question box where you can chat those over to us.
Melissa, do you have any questions yourself?
Yeah, I have kind of a random question. I do actually. A lot of our members, especially kind of in the retail space, are hiring employees and having problems with employee turnover from this kind of an hourly work employee perspective. And in that kind of particular hiring process, you might not have the time or resources to do any kind of these like in-depth personality tests or anything like that. So I was wondering if you have any tips of just kind of the short version of this, if you've only got 15, 20 minutes with somebody and you can only focus on 2 or 3 things, what would your recommendations for that be?
Well, the one recommendation, which is a tough recommendation for me to make, but is to not skimp on the hiring, because part of the turnover might actually be the hiring process itself. And so it's kind of putting a cycle in place that's not a healthy cycle to retain people. So I know how hard it is to find kind of that frontline employee, but if you can spend a little bit more time there, and personality assessments don't always need to be done, but even pre-screening questions for people can be a way to do that, of where there's some online, even some of the recruiting boards are offering these now, where an employer can put in two or three questions. You don't want to do too much, back to the making sure you're conserving time, but two or three provocative questions that people ask and answer ahead of time to get some of that information in there. It seems you want to turn the cycle into a virtuous cycle, but shortening the interview process, I think, should be done with extreme caution, because if you're not hiring the right people, they're more likely to quit anyway. So getting ahead of that, and it's a huge investment in getting people to do great work for the company, and treating talent like an asset, and making sure that you're doing the due diligence on, is this asset going to be a powerful contributor, whatever role they are. Customer service is absolutely critical, because you want all those people that are buying from you to feel important. You want them to come back. You want them to be a loyal customer. So those engagement points are just really, really important for the business. There's a group called Kim Blanchard Group, and I've worked with them before and been a Kim Blanchard coach. And they did this great research study that they showed that the employee passion and the consumer loyalty were linked. And so to me, just that thing, that connection between how the employees show up and the loyalty of the customer, there's a profit and growth motive there for the business to spend a little bit more time. Now, I've sometimes, especially with leadership, sometimes people could go through 3 to 5 different interview sets, and 5 might be a little bit too much, but again, this is an asset that you're adding into the company, and making sure that you're doing it well is really important. So, I mean, maybe not do 5 interviews, but be very cautious about skipping on time. And consider the whole recruiting process, and thinking a little bit more deeply, like, where am I sourcing the talent? Simply posting something online on an online job board isn't really recruiting. Recruiting is, getting involved with some other organizations, really getting out there and getting the word out there that there's these job opportunities, especially with unemployment being so low right now. It does put the ownership back on the company to really get the word out there and make sure that you're a premier employer to attract really good, committed, loyal people to the company.
Awesome. We've got a couple questions here. One is from DJ. Thanks for the question. It said, I have seen where employees do well with the interview. However, what they do during employment is different. And how can we compensate for that?
Yes, I've seen that too. And that is, to me, this is part of the reason why to spend more time in the interviewing process, to really, I'm scrolling back to some of these questions, to really dig into what is their mindset. So how do you define poor performance? Like, asking some of these questions. Now, I don't know if you do reference checks, but everyone will give you, or hopefully everyone should be giving you, a list of 3 people to contact to do a reference for. And so those reference checks can look a little bit different. They've given you the permission to contact these people, so that's good. They're probably going to be a good reference check, but you don't just ask those people, hey, is this person a good person for us to work for? You can actually ask them some of these behavioral interview questions as well too. Have you seen a time where Mary did a really good job coordinating a collaborative insight session? Have you seen how Mary's built critical thinkers. What did she do? You know, what were the things that you think are her gifts? So I think digging in a little bit on the references people give you to ask them the questions and match it up with the person's interview and see, does it play well? But don't underthink the reference check, and don't just say, hey, would you recommend this person? Ask them the questions.
Awesome. Well, I know we're already over time, but Jen, if you're okay with it, I want to try and get to two more questions.
Absolutely.
One of them that we've got is there a scorecard or something you can use for your existing team to know how strong the servant leadership skills might be of your team currently so that you can identify areas of improvement and gauge progress?
That's a great question. One of the things I should work on that. Really, I've never seen one exactly, but one of the things that is a better way of asking people questions about servant leadership, it kind of goes back to the Maya Angelou quote, which I love, is people don't won't remember what you said or did, but um, they'll remember how you made them feel. And that, I think, just sums this up so much so well, is, you know, asking people, and if you're doing 360s, or even if you don't do something so formally, asking people what are the strengths of their leader. Part of that should be about what's the experience in working for that person. Do you feel like this person has built you? Do you feel like this person has helped you grow? Has this person challenged some of your thinking? Because it's not all about kind of a happy unicorns. It's really about growing critical thinkers. So there should be some processes in place where the leaders pushing the boundaries in a really productive way to help people think differently and think beyond where their current mindset is. And so it's really about asking people questions about what is their experience working with this leader. But that's a really great idea. I've never seen one. So let me put that on my list. But I think, you know, at a very simple level, especially if you're not a larger business and don't want to engage in some of the more formal 360s, asking people really about what their experiences are. And hopefully leaders are going back to their teams and saying, hey, what could I do better? What do you want me to stop doing, or keep doing? And asking people what do they like about working with them. Um, I don't have a checklist per se, but on my website, I moved it to the top before this. I do have some more information. I'm moving to my website so you guys can see it. I do have some information. There's my website at the bottom about hiring for servant leaderships on the website that you can, it's free access. You don't have to sign up for anything. So you can just go there and pull that off and use that as a resource, but not a checklist. That's a great idea.
Awesome. Well, one last question for you, Jen, and thanks for everybody who's been engaging and chatting. And these are great questions. Does anyone else experience the phenomenon of people not even showing up to actual interviews? We've been having about a 50% no-show rate for all level and types of positions, so that makes the whole recruiting process challenging.
Yes, it is. It's not uncommon. And you know, it's kind of shocking. And I think this is one of the things about the unemployment rate being where it is, but also, you know, the history of businesses, sometimes it hasn't been so good, and businesses have had this habit of not getting back to applicants. So, you know, people put in their applicants into the job and the business won't follow up with them. And so my theory, unfortunately, is I think some of this is coming back on us because we also haven't always treated those applicants with a lot of good follow-up too. And so now we're experiencing it on the other side of it. But there was, I recently attended a Disrupt HR. If you guys aren't familiar with it, it's a fun website, a great resource. And it was a technical recruiter talking about how to get people to reply to your emails and how to get people to show up for interviews. I'll go ahead and I don't know if you guys are on Twitter, but I'll retweet that particular Disrupt HR session, so it'll be at the top of my feed so you can see it. But I think it was a brilliant idea. And it's also a really great way to kind of show the culture of your company and why they want to work there. Why should somebody want to show up for the interview? Why is company A better than company B? And get to show the company personality. But yeah, it's unfortunately not common or not uncommon right now what you're experiencing. But the more personal you can make those connections, HR people that aren't texting, um, that's a new skill for recruiters is texting your applicants, calling them, following up with emails. But it is an effect of low unemployment, and I think some misbehavior on our part as businesses in the past.
Awesome. Well, this is some awesome discussion. I want to be very respectful of the time, and thank you so much for joining us and for the amazing content, Jen. This has been great. We're going to be having an exciting webinar series coming up this summer. We're calling it the Summer of Sustainable Sourcing. So we're going to be talking to the Marine Stewardship Council, the Roundtable for the Sustainable Sourcing of Palm Oil, and the new Roundtable for Sustainable Natural Rubber. So it's going to be awesome. But thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. This recording will be up on our YouTube channel shortly. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with myself, mbauer@petsustainability.org, or I know Jen welcomes questions as well at her email address. So once again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And we'll see you at one of our webinars soon. Have a great day. Thanks.